We're really delighted to have with us this evening one of the ablest diplomats to have served in the United States in recent decades, Christopher Hill. Near the start of his memoir, Outpost, Life on the Front Lines of American Diplomacy, Chris notes that the Foreign Service isn't particularly well known or fully appreciated, at least not outside of Washington. Nor is the usual depiction of Foreign Service officers, whether in movies or elsewhere, especially complimentary. American diplomats often are portrayed as meek, stuffy, or all too ready to find reasons not to do something, particularly if that something would offend the sensibilities of a host country. Well, Chris wasn't that kind of diplomat. During his 33 years in the Foreign Service, he held a number of critical assignments and played key roles in at least 4 diplomatic challenges. The Bosnian crisis that led to the Dayton Peace Accords, the Kosovo crisis that led to a NATO intervention, the effort under George W. Bush to thwart North Korea's nuclear program, and the move early in Barack Obama's presidency to wind down the U.S. military involvement in Iraq and give the State Department the U.S. lead there. Iraq was Chris's last posting as a diplomat and his 4th tour as an ambassador. He also headed up U.S. embassies in Korea, Poland, and Macedonia. And he served for a time as the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and Pacific Affairs. His book opens with a gripping description of a road bomb attack on his motorcade in Iraq, and the story of his career accelerates from there. Chris left the Foreign Service in 2010 and went to the University of Denver, where he's been Dean of the School of International Studies. In a review of Outpost in the Washington Post, Glenn Kessler, who covered the State Department for a number of years, called Chris's memoir, quote, a great introduction to the difficult game of diplomacy. Kessler added, quote, rather than a turgid tome, Hill's book is lively, entertaining, even at times laugh out loud funny. And a review in the Wall Street Journal said, quote, anyone interested in joining the Foreign Service would benefit from reading about what Mr. Hill did and how he did it. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Christopher Hill.
Thank you very much. Brad, I don't think I can fold up that chair, so yeah, that'll have to. Anyway, hey, it's great to see you all. It's such an honor to be here at this iconic bookstore. Politics and Prose is just sort of the place where you really want to be. I'm so honored to be here. I mean, this is a place I've seen since I was a kid, basically never buying anything, just reading everything. But that was even before online. So, but it is just such a pleasure to be here. My wife Julie is here in the audience, and I think it's just great. It's almost as good as a tattered cover in Denver, Colorado, which is kind of a similar deal, by the way. Anyway, I probably like a lot of Foreign Service officers, and I see a few of you in the room here, I never thought I'd ever write a book. I really thought that books were something that other people wrote, certainly not Foreign Service officers. And that has something to do with the fact that we're basically trained to write 2-page memos. I mean, there are people who spilled onto a 3rd page, to be sure, but they've never been heard from since. 3-page memos just way too long, because after all, people are only reading the first page. We'd also write things called telegrams, kind of a quaint thing. No one heard of telegrams until WikiLeaks came along. I guess now everyone's heard of telegrams. But the idea of going and having a 400-page book was something I just never thought I could do. When Julie was really pushing me to write this book, I told her I can do it, but it'll be a 2-page book. And I was sort of imagining what it would look like with a cover. And, this is a must-read, very efficient book. So she encouraged me to go on to Terra Incognita, which was page 3, and then on to page 4. I couldn't believe it. And then it was a little like the Forrest Gump, scene where he just keeps running and running and going. And then I stopped. And so I stopped at page, I think, 402. Simon & Schuster whittled it down to 400, but it was okay. And what's fun about writing, and I never really knew that because writing in the State Department is things like, we need a memo, Hill, and we need it in 20 minutes. And so, you rush to your office, you shut the door, and then you start, writing something. But what was fun for me in writing the book was to, first of all, just tell stories that I think people might want to hear. And then as you start writing them, you remember stuff that you completely forgot. So it becomes kind of a transformational event where, you find yourself sitting there laughing at stuff that you'd completely forgotten about. And so that was, for me, the real great pleasure of sort of reliving relationships. Even meeting with Slobodan Milosevic had its moments, and so suddenly you've kind of pushed those out of your mind, or you've gone to enough therapy that they've been pushed out of your mind, and then it all comes tumbling back, and you sort of remember some of these people, and you remember those moments where some moments you rise to the occasion, other moments you regret the rest of your life you didn't rise to the occasion. And so for me, it was just a real opportunity to relive these things. And I hope to kind of put them down for posterity to understand that American diplomacy is not an oxymoron. I mean, we are good at it. We're very good at it. We have a lot of very talented people engaged in this. And as we sit here tonight, I mean, there's 7,000 Americans out there all over the world dealing with some of these crazy problems in countries most people can't spell, let alone find on the map. I mean, we're good at this stuff. And I thought it was very important to kind of tell the American people that, Americans know how to kind of work with others. And I try to stress the notion that we're not a kind of giant nanny brigade telling everyone how to behave and kind of wagging our finger at everybody, but rather we're more of a kind of can-do, MacGyver nation that is able to say, wait a minute, I can fix that. And I think as Foreign Service officers, especially, we try to look forward. And, when you're in the Balkans where everyone's looking back 600 years, or worse yet, when you're in Iraq and everyone's looking back 1,300 years, and to tell these people, we're not going to get there if we're looking back. We've got to look forward, and we've got to figure out governance structures that will kind of help people understand that, how to put together solutions for things. And so what's kind of amusing about it, of course, is that so much of what I write, nothing is ever finished. Nothing is ever over. Problems that we've seen out there are still there. And then as a country, we kind of learn these lessons through a certain period of collective memory, and then we forget, and then we have to relearn the lessons. I mean, when I think of a place like Bosnia, people think of Bosnia as being the Dayton Peace Accords, and indeed, Dayton Peace Accords was absolutely key. That's where I had my, probably my main mentor in the Foreign Service, or as I call him, my mentor and my tormentor, that is Dick Holbrooke. And we came up with something at Dayton, but it wasn't Dayton that determined how Bosnia would look. It was something called the Contact Group Plan a couple of years before, where through this Contact Group Plan we developed kind of governance solutions, because all wars end. And so when they end, you need to know what is going to happen after the war ends. And so when I think of the situation in Syria today, where we talk about the need to find people we want to arm, give weapons to. Well, if you don't know what it is you're trying to arm people for, why are you talking about arming them? That is, what are the governance solutions for Syria in the future? Should Syria be one state? Should it be within its international borders? Should there be a parliament in Damascus? What are the rights of the minorities there? What are the rights of the provinces? What are the responsibilities? What is the power of the central government? All of these issues we understood that we needed to solve in Bosnia before we could give arms to people who were somehow who we felt were somehow moderate and in our and supportive of us. In fact, I don't even remember using the term moderate. I still don't understand moderate, what that means. I'm a moderate Red Sox fan, for example. What we did in Bosnia was to create governance solutions. Bosnia would remain within its international borders. Bosnia would be would consist of two parts: a federation, which was a Muslim Croat federation embracing some 51% of the territory. There would be a Serb republic embracing 49%. There would be the right of return for refugees. There would be parliaments in each of these entities. There would be a parliament in overall, that is the overall state of Bosnia. There would be a kind of turn-taking arrangement for president. We kind of worked this all out, and then we went to Dayton, and we figured out how all of these elements would be would actually become a solution. And now, of course, you go to Bosnia, everyone's complaining. Well, let me tell you, they've been complaining for thousands of years. It's not true they've been fighting for thousands of years. It is true that they've been complaining for thousands of years. But they haven't been shooting people, and the reason they haven't been shooting people is we've had governance solutions. And so when you look at that, which I describe early on in the book, and then you look at Syria, where we're trying to identify moderates in order to arm them. Arm them for what? To support what? To support provisional elections, to elect a provisional government, to have a provisional constitution. I mean, what is that? And by the way, when you try to arm moderates, who's a moderate? So do you have a questionnaire? Is it multiple choice? Is it like one of those drivers say, okay, he must be a moderate? So I submit to you that we need much more of an approach to understand that war does not last forever. War does end, at which point you have peace, and what kind of peace are you going to have. And so in talking about Bosnia there, I hope people read it and think, well, gee, maybe we should be thinking of something like that in Syria. Similarly, in dealing with Kosovo, I mean, that was kind of a loser of an issue. I was asked to be the special envoy there, and I knew that there was no overlap between the Serb position, the Albanian or the Kosovo-Albanian position. And so I knew it was probably we were not going to get people to agree on autonomy. Autonomy or complete autonomy for Kosovo was far too much for the Serbs and far too little for the Albanians. So as you kind of pulled people together, you realize the rubber bands would never quite reach. But what was absolutely critical in the situation in Kosovo was we have people called Europeans, that is, people who live in Europe, and they basically don't like to have war in Europe because they've had war in Europe, and they'd sort of like to see a real good faith effort to do something besides war, that is, have a political settlement. And so for this sort of transactional American thought that, this is a mess, we better start dropping bombs, that is not going to work for the rest of the people in Europe who have lived with war too often in their history. And so we needed to demonstrate to our European allies so much of the fact that they would see that we were trying to come up with something reasonable, and ultimately one side, in this case it was the Serb side, refused to go along with anything reasonable. And so by the time we got into the business of dropping ordnance, everyone understood that we had tried everything we could do, and that is that war should be a last resort, not a first resort. And I think it ultimately worked. Now, of course, I described that what were we doing in Kosovo? We were dropping bombs to change Milosevic's mind. Well, usually when you drop bombs, you want to, I don't know, kill somebody or destroy a bridge, or, you have some kind of military objective. In Kosovo, we're dropping bombs to change his mind. So what are you going to target when your objective is to change someone's mind? Do you hit a bridge because you think Milosevic likes bridges and that will upset him or something? Do you attack his mother-in-law? I mean, what do you do? And so I think this kind of, I tried to explain that these military solutions, as transactional and sort of get it done as they look, are often really things that, you're kind of holding your breath and wondering whether it's going to work. Fortunately, it did. But as a British diplomat said, that was such a great idea. Let's never do that again. So what we're doing in Kosovo really was to work not only with the Kosovars and the Serbs and dealing with all the human rights problems of war, and show me a war and I'll show you a human rights problem. What we're trying to do was deal to make sure that we could kind of stay in formation with the Europeans. This was also very important in Bosnia. People often look at Bosnia, what a moral failure of the West, what a terrible human rights situation. All true. But what it was also was an example of real fraying of the transatlantic relationship where, we would be in Washington, that is not far from this bookstore, saying, you Europeans, you got to get with the program. And the Europeans would say, that's easy for you to say back in the Politics and Prose bookstore. But for us out there in Europe dealing with these problems, we want to see America really work with us. And so I think we did a good job of kind of closing the gap with the Europeans. As I fast forward through some of the other adventures, I don't want to give the whole book away, Brad, because then no one will buy it or something. But
400 pages.
There you go. Okay. But as we fast forward, I go to Korea. I was ambassador in South Korea. And for those of you who've been there, you understand. For those of you who have not been there, you will understand. It's a great ally. They're really a great ally. And, for people who in this country consider Korea the forgotten war, some kind of, kissing your sister type tie. In fact, we created a state there called the Republic of Korea, 2/3 of the peninsula. I wish it were the whole peninsula. I still wish it were the whole peninsula. But we created, I think, one of the real sort of go-go countries of the world. Great success. And yet, when I was there in the summer, when I arrived there in the summer of 2004, this U.S.-Korean relationship was really fraying. The Koreans had kind of developed their own identity that was kind of separate from the Vietnam War, and they had, from the Korean War, they had said, thank you all the time to the Americans. They're very good at saying thank you to us. But what I was worried was, as going forward, our relationship needed more than just this historical experience, searing that it was, to keep us together. And in particular, the real problem was that early in the first term of the George W. Bush administration, again, people in Washington, though not in the bookstore, but in Washington, were saying things like, we need to go and bomb the North Koreans, and we need to otherwise take care of this great threat to America. While South Koreans are saying, look, we live here. We live 25 miles away. Most of Seoul is like 25 miles away from the DMZ. Easy for you to say back in the U.S. that we ought to start a war, but we're the ones who have to live with it. And so I was very much kind of riveted by that experience, where I could see that we were kind of out of formation and very much kind of going in different directions. And so when Secretary Rice, and I go through this in the book, asked me to leave Korea after frankly just a few months of this, living in this extraordinary country, and become Assistant Secretary for Asia and deal with and become the head of the U.S. delegation to the North Korea talks, I thought it was a real opportunity to do something for the U.S.-Korean relationship that I hadn't been able to do as ambassador there, and to really start working with the Koreans to try to work together on dealing with the North Korean issue. Up until then, it had been seen as a U.S.-North Korean issue. That is, U.S. diplomats would get on the plane in Korean, the airport in Incheon, and the Korean diplomats would wave goodbye and say, don't forget to brief us on what happened when you talk to the North Koreans. And so those days were over. I mean, we needed a situation where the Koreans were very much working with us. The South Koreans understood that we were respectful of their situation as the country on the Korean Peninsula. And so I go through a lot of this in the book to explain the importance of these relationships and the importance of trying to deal with North Korea, but doing it together with allies such as Japan and especially Korea. And I also talk about the real need to work with China. You know, the Chinese are often are going to have their own view, and often their own view will be determined by trying to find the opposite of what our view is. But at the same time, I think we need to understand that 1.4 billion people is a bit of a quorum there, and that we need to be respectful that this is more than a country, this is a civilization, and we need to understand what is going on in China. And people who think that this is some kind of replay of the Peloponnesian Wars, I mean, it's amazing. People who can't spell Peloponnesia, I can't, but think that this is U.S. and China as a replay of Sparta and Athens, you know, the rising power and the established power, and that somehow conflict is inevitable with China. May I suggest that you fly to Beijing, take a cab, go up about 45 minutes north of Beijing, you'll see something called the Great Wall of China, and then ask yourself whether we really want to get into a fight with the people who built a thing like this. The answer is no. The answer is we want to figure out ways to deal with China. And what better place to start than with North Korea? I mean, North Korea, you know, these are people only a mother can love. I mean, and you know, need to understand they're from some other parallel universe. And then to mix the metaphor further, I mean, the Chinese, they sort of met them when they were teenagers, and they know they shouldn't be with them anymore, but nonetheless, they're part of their background, and it's very complicated. And so what was important for us was to find patterns of cooperation with the Chinese, figure out ways to deal with the North Koreans, but do it in a kind of multilateral context. So certainly, you know, as I began to be President Bush's representative on the six-party talks, it was kind of fun because no one expected the Bush administration, of all administrations, to be interested in working multilaterally with countries, and yet there we were, working very much multilaterally. So it became one of those Washington stories where, for a while, everyone applauds and says I'm great, and then they realize it's not so easy to get North Korea to give up their nuclear weapons, and so before you knew it, the six-party talks would always have the word failed in front of them. The failed six-party talks. Even the Washington Post would say that now and again. What can I say? So I went through one of these cycles where at first things were really good and then things were not so good. But still, I think the policy was absolutely correct to work with the North Koreans by addressing them with the South Koreans, the Japanese, and frankly even the Russians, because that's another place that we need to find ways to keep the lines open and work with them. And so, you know, we got a few things. We shut down the plutonium plant. We got them to blow up their cooling tower. It's true we paid for it, but it was worth it. It was money well spent. And we blew it up on CNN. I remember the president at the time said, now that's verifiable, and it was. He noticed. It was nice. And so, ultimately we weren't able to kind of get the job done. I mean, the North Koreans, they gave us a kind of phony baloney declaration of their programs, phony baloney in that it did not include some things that we knew they were up to or had been up to, namely their uranium enrichment facilities. So it was kind of an incomplete and not quite accurate description of their programs. But we weren't too worried about that, because even if they had given us something really completely accurate, no one would have believed them anyway. The issue was to get the North Koreans to give us a verification means to look at what exactly we needed to inspect. Now they tried, well, you did that in Iraq, and we're not going to allow you to do that here. But the fact is, the North Koreans were not telling the truth about a number of things, and we needed a capacity, really, to have a robust inspection plan. We were doing okay through the summer of '08, and then Kim Jong-il became Kim Jong-very ill, and sometime in the summer he had a stroke, and so whether it was because they didn't get that kind of leadership, or whether because they simply had done enough on it, they didn't go farther. And then by the fall of 2008, the program the negotiations kind of broke down, and we are where we are today, which is without much progress since. I mention all this because soon after the inaugural, I was invited by our new Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, up to her office, and I thought she wanted still another briefing on North Korea. She was of the view that maybe the North Koreans had kind of stopped the process because they wanted to deal with the new administration rather than the old administration. Perfectly sensible viewpoint. So I go up to her office expecting another desultory conversation about how we can get the North Korean talks going again. And I walk in and I notice all the furniture had been kind of rearranged, which happens with a new Secretary of State. And then I saw that she had her deputy secretary, her undersecretary, her chief of staff there. And I was thinking, wow, North Korea is getting an upgrade here. And so she invited me to sit in the wing chair next to the fireplace. I had never gotten to sit in the wing chair next to the fireplace. It was quite an honor. I was sort of sitting there, and then she said all these nice things, and I sort of felt like Bilbo Baggins, at the end of. And then she said, and then there's one more thing I'd like you to do. And I thought it was still another memo on North Korea. I had 5 of them in the hopper ready to go. Whatever she wanted on North Korea, I was ready. She said, I'd like you to go to Iraq. And so North Korea, when I think of that, Foreign Service officers, although it's only 2-page memos, it's always 3 points in a 2-page memo. Never 4, never 2, but always 3 points. So I said, well, Madam Secretary, let me say 3 things. I'm very honored. I know how important it is, and I'm going to have to think about this. And so I thought about it overnight. I thought, come on, you got to do it. So off I went to Iraq. I can tell you quite honestly, as I stand here tonight, that is probably the most messed up situation I have ever seen in U.S. foreign policy. I wasn't around for Vietnam, so I'm sure that's a close second or maybe tie for first. But I have never seen a situation where the U.S. government understood so little about such a complex place, and frankly speaking, has engaged in it in a way that you can credibly argue is worse than before. So it was truly staggering to me to see the problems in Iraq. It was a problem where we thought that kind of slicing off this dictatorship would result in kind of some free flowering of democracy, a kind of middle class that would now participate in the political institutions of the country, not understanding the fundamental truth that when you take away civil society, even evil civil society, and that is what you can describe Saddam Hussein as, you replace it with other loyalties, and those other loyalties were sectarian. It's not to say sectarianism started in 2003. It did not. But it's also not to say sectarianism, which has been around for 1,300 years, has somehow resulted in people fighting for 1,300 years. They have not. But we certainly helped sectarianism once again go through another cycle, and I think we're living with that today. I spent, and I describe this in the book, I spent a lot of time with the Iraqi prime minister, someone named Nouri al-Maliki. We're not in touch, I must say, but I mean, if this is a man, if he ever had charisma, it cleared up a long time ago. He was extremely difficult to deal with. And, in a perfect world, Nouri al-Maliki would have, representing 60% of the population, Shia, 20% are Sunni Arabs, and then another 20% of Kurds. And so he would have understood, let's say he were Nelson Mandela, we'll put that in the subjunctive because he's not. If he were Nelson Mandela, he would have said, these Sunnis, 20% of the population here, they're used to running this place. They've run this place for centuries. I, Nelson Mandela, Nouri al-Maliki, I need to reach out to these people and make them understand that I want them part of the future of Iraq. The way Nelson Mandela did with the white South Africans, also a 20% proposition. But that wasn't Maliki's attitude to them. They had oppressed him and his people for years, and they were continuing to say that the worst thing that ever happened in Iraq was to give Iraq to these sheep herders, the Shia. So they gave him very little support, and his response to that was to just go after them. So you could see it coming. In 2010, when I was there was an election. And the election was a parliamentary election. And basically the parliament was all basically gerrymandered so that the seats, 60% of the seats were going to be for the Shia, 20% were going to be for the Sunni, and the other 20% were going to be for the Kurds. The trouble was the Shia, who were always fractious people, they were in different parties, and they had only given Maliki 89 seats, and you needed 163 of a 325 seat parliament to rule. Now, the Sunnis, otherwise known as Iraqi, the Iraq National Party, they would never acknowledge that it's a Sunni party. It was. And so the Sunnis only had 91, more than Maliki's 89. Therefore, the Iraqi should have won the election. So this guy with 89 seats steals the election. It's not how it works. You need 163 seats. Do the math. Take out your iPhones and figure out what is 50% plus 1 of 325. It's 163. And so Maliki went to work on his fellow Shia. And Alawi, who was in charge of the Iraqi party, or nominally in charge. So Maliki goes to work, Alawi goes to CNN. And so before you know it, you have a situation where we're told that Maliki is stealing the election. Well, what did Maliki do? I mean, you'd walk to his office, and you'd have to walk past a row of that day's sheikhs, these tribal leaders, and Maliki would bring him into his office and explain, and God knows what other techniques he used on him. But lo and behold, Maliki was able to build up the number of seats that his people were prepared to join his government, such that he eventually got the nod to replace himself or to get a second term as prime minister. I was the ambassador there. I never got one single instruction from anyone in Washington saying we got to get rid of Maliki, which is, I think the correct non-instruction. But to this day, I'm told, how could you have ever allowed Maliki to get a second term? Well, first of all, I don't carry a gun. And secondly, we were at a stage in Iraqi history where our ability to tell them who their elected officials were going to be, it was really at an end. I mention that because I go back, in the beginning of the book, I should have mentioned this earlier, I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I had a Suzuki 125 dirt bike, and I went around checking credit unions in rural Cameroon. And one time I had a credit union that was really terrible. The governance was terrible. And I went to the people and I told them that. And the general membership all said, "Oh, thank you so much." And they'd turn to this board of directors and they'd yell at them. They'd shake their finger at them, tell them, "You're terrible. How could you do this? You know, this guy has seen all the things that you've done." And then they proceeded to elect them all again. And so it was very clear to me when I was 22 years old in rural Cameroon that sometimes people elect people for reasons that us foreigners don't necessarily understand. And I certainly had that Peace Corps experience well under my belt as I was looking at the situation in Iraq. So I go through all these kind of experiences. It was they kind of reinforce each other. I haven't mentioned, one of my favorite countries, which was Poland. I mean, to be there in the mid-'80s, the horror of the whole thing. I mean, these tremendously civilized people living under this miserable communist regime, and my thinking at the time, forget it, it'll never get better. And then to be able to come back as ambassador in the year 2000 and this, black and white grainy film known as Poland had become, living color when I came back. And so there are these kind of wonderful moments that you realize that if you really are dedicated to something, and if you have people around you, because this is not about me, this is about a lot of Foreign Service officers, and if you really believe that you can make things better, lo and behold, sometimes things can be better. So with those opening comments, we'll go to some questions. Thank you. Thank
you. Remember, if you have a question, there's a mic there and a mic over there.
What action should we be taking about ISIS?
What action should we be taking about ISIS?
Yes, which according to the Washington Post last Sunday is being led by a number of Saddam Hussein's generals.
Yes.
Did you know any of Saddam Hussein's generals?
Yeah.
And have you been asked to serve as a consultant on ISIS?
Yeah. The answer to both is no. I would say that the question is what should be done about ISIS. We learned in the Washington Post last week that ISIS has some of Saddam Hussein's generals in it, which is very true. And did I know any of them? So, am I being consulted on it? So the last 2 points is no. But what is ISIS? I mean, ISIS is a radical Sunni faction whose view of things is not that we're the great Satan. I mean, they don't like us, but they really want to go after the Shia. And so for ISIS, the idea that part of the Arab Middle East should be under the Shia is anathema. They consider the Shia to be, first of all, Iran sympathizers, some element of truth there, but mainly they are apostates. They are fallen believers, and as such, they need to be liquidated. I mean, that's the ISIS view. Are there members of Saddam Hussein's former army there? You bet there are. And a lot of the sort of battle-hardened elements of ISIS are, in fact, elements of the former Iraqi army under Saddam. By the way, they weren't so great under Saddam, and they're not so great now. And I think that's worth pointing out because, to some extent, we've kind of taken the view that ISIS is 10 feet tall, and, what are we going to do about them? And I think there's a lot of reason for optimism with respect to Iraq. That we are going to be able to deal with this. We've seen them pushed back from Tikrit. They were pushed back from Erbil. They were very close to this Kurdish capital, which, by the way, they consider Arab land, not Kurdish. So, I mean, these are not very, how to put it, they are not really in favor of inclusion. They are, or diversity. They're much more interested in running everything themselves. So they've been pushed back there. And, what I worry about is the Iraqi army, which was kind of gutted because of our so-called de-Baathification plans, where anyone who was a Baathist got thrown out. And the trouble is, anyone who was a Baathist, they were the people who kind of knew how to do things. And so in some cases, and so we should have had some truth and reconciliation council of the kind that South Africa did, but instead we kind of threw them out in the way that Nazis were thrown out of positions in 1945 in Germany. And so these people were the core of the insurgency that we had to deal with in 2006, 2007, the so-called the surge period. But they were never, when you drive someone out of some place, that means that person has gone somewhere else. And so a lot of these people found refuge in the hinterlands of Syria, and now they're back. So I don't think there's any diplomacy right now with ISIS. I think we need to, strengthen the Iraqi army. We need to strengthen the Kurdish forces. To be sure, encourage the Shia to be more inclusionary of Sunnis, but I don't think ISIS cares that much. But it's fine. We should be doing that. But I think, and we need to get other countries in the region, especially the Saudis, because it's not to say that there's Saudi royal family money going to ISIS. I don't think there's any evidence for that. But there are a lot of Saudis who consider the big threat to be coming from the Shia. They see Iraq became a Shia country that's on their northern border. They see these Houthis, who are pretty tough customers in Yemen, and they are Shia. They see their own Shia in the East Province. And now we're asking the Saudis to fight against this radical Sunni force. And for some Saudis, they're saying, well, that's the only thing that's keeping us from being totally encircled by the Shia. So I think we have some diplomacy to do with the Saudis, and I hope we can kind of stick with it and stay with it until ISIS is eliminated, and I believe they will be. I don't see that as a long-term fixture.
I'm Timothy Towell, retired Foreign Service officer, 31 years.
Only 31 years. I got you beat there.
I thought your talk was superb, and I look forward to buying your book, and I will read it carefully. Excuse me. I especially liked what you said, and I wrote it down. We are good at diplomacy. I sort of thought that I was suffering from narcissism, and that's my shrink's problem. But you endorse the fact that we're good at it.
What is diplomacy? It's about finding solutions and, first of all, saying, okay, everyone calm down. That's kind of the first thing. You get the people to calm down. Now, what do you want? What do you want? And then you try to figure something out. I mean, it's...
In this year, 2015, what percentage of the issues that are on all of our plates are diplomacy? This lady had a wonderful question, but Ukraine, Venezuela, the Cuban rapprochement, the Korea.
Yeah.
What is diplomacy, and what is it, the build up to 2016, people that don't like a president who they call a socialist from Kenya, or they want to sharpshoot at Hillary, or they want to sharpshoot at that guy with the awful hair, Donald Trump, and Cruz, who's had only a year and a half of training.
Yeah.
What is politics and what is diplomacy to solve this?
I've spent my whole career never interfering in the internal affairs of any country, including my own. I must say, there's some of these people, when they run for president, I'm tempted to run for Canada. It's painful to watch. I think, first of all, we need to understand that often people have to live with each other. We have to live with each other, but, peoples in Iraq and elsewhere have to live with each other. And so you try to find governance solutions that kind of work for everybody so they can live with each other. There's certain circumstances, I would put Nazi Germany in this category, where there's no negotiating you could do. You had to deal with the problem militarily. I would put ISIS in that category. However, I think there's a lot of diplomacy that needs to be done with the sort of circle around ISIS, and I was just talking about that with Saudi Arabia. And, when I look at Korea, we need to be tough and firm with the North Koreans, keeping the door open to negotiations, but I think we need to be active, very active diplomatically with the Chinese. And I think we need to be active and respectful of South Korea's position. And, going around just asking the South Koreans to thank us 10 times a day, I mean, they should thank us 20 times a day. But when you have to ask to be thanked, that's probably not where you want to be. And I think to some extent we kind of overdid that with the South Koreans. I think we're in a good position with them now. I really do. And I think they're really one of our best allies in the world. They certainly have some of the most capable military forces in the world. But I think it's important with the North Koreans to keep the door open to negotiation, to hold them to agreements that they've already made. That is, don't let them, come to us like some amnesia patient and saying, oh, no, we don't remember that we signed an agreement a few years ago. Really stick with it. But be firm and work with others. And kind of, when you get a coalition of countries, you can kind of push somebody in the right direction. And I think that's basically what happened in Iran. And I think that was a very serious piece of diplomacy. And I'm very proud of the people who did that. We have a long way to go, but it is, if someone doesn't like it, terrific. Show me what the other path is. Show me, you got a better idea. And and usually that kind of criticism is, when you say, show me your better idea, and they change the subject on you, or they lapse into some generalities. Well, we need to be tough. I like being tough. I get it, but tell me what that means. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador. First off, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank the retired member of the Foreign Service over there as well for your service to our country. It's at times can be an unsung job, but it requires a lot of sacrifice and putting your life in danger, as sort of what did happen to one of your successors in Seoul just last month.
Yeah.
My question does involve the Iran agreement. Where do you see that framework agreement? Where do you see the endpoint, say 5 years from now, of the result of the framework agreement? Do you see it being successful? Do you see it ending up like the North Korean agreement did?
I think what is going on in Iran is the country is split between those who care about joining the rest of the world and those who don't, who really want to have nuclear weapons. I think it's been important to strengthen those who care about Iran being a good member of the international community, and I think that's partly what we're doing, just strengthening the Javad Zarif, University of Denver graduate, by the way. Couldn't resist the little plug there. And strengthening that sort of person. Now, the agreement is not for the rest of history, you understand. A lot of that, I think, was necessary because this group with Javad Zarif and and we're in a position where they couldn't take as a position that they would destroy investments in nuclear equipment. So they had to kind of take this position. All right, we'll freeze it. We won't, engage in it, and put a time horizon. So I think if we have, if the meat gets put on the bones and we get, really good, robust inspections, if we get the Iranians kind of going down the ladder of escalation, that is taking the plutonium reactor, make it impossible to produce spent fuel, which is plutonium, which becomes plutonium. I think if the agreement succeeds with what we think it's going to do, then I think over the fullness of time, the Iranians will continue to build down. If it's followed by tensions, if it's followed by efforts to, continue to kind of make people like Zarif seem as traitors to their own country, then I think the nuclear problem could come back. The thing I worry about, however, is Iran has really misbehaved in so many ways in the Arab Middle East. They certainly, when I had an IED attack on my vehicle, that was an IED made in Iran. When I had a 107 millimeter rocket attack, that was a 107 millimeter rocket made in Iran. The Iranians have controlled many of these militia groups in Iraq. Not good. They have been supportive of terrorist groups throughout the region, including Hezbollah. you know. But I think you have to understand that this problem's not going to go away immediately. I mean, I mentioned Hezbollah. And you wonder, well, what are the Iranians doing in southern Lebanon? I mean, what do they even care about southern Lebanon? Well, you know, get in the Wayback Machine and go back to 1501 when Ismail, I think it was called a Shah, Ismail had Sunni Iran, and his people, Sunnis, he knew that that would not be a successful bulwark against Ottoman expansion. So he converts all of Iran to Shiism. How does he do that? Well, he kills a lot of people, of course, but he also brings clerics from southern Lebanon to Shia clerics who essentially proselytize and change Iran into a Shia country. So, you know, if you're some mullah in Iran, you know, I'm not talking Javad Zarif here. I'm talking, you know, mullahs from Qom. You know, you look at that and you think, you know, Lebanon is part of your historical endowment. I mean, that is very important to you. In my view, they got to get over it, but it's tough, and the problem is rooted in centuries of history.
Thank you.
Maybe over here.
Oh, yes.
Hi, Chris, I'm Tom Sneeringer. I had the pleasure of working with you
Tom.
many years ago on the Hill.
Congressman Rostenkowski.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Big time in '89.
It was great.
Yeah, great to see you, Tom.
You told me a story one time that I looked quickly in the book, and it's not in here, so
Oh, dear.
I assume it was on the 2 pages that Simon & Schuster cut.
Yeah.
But just for a lighter moment here, I wonder if you would recount for us the incident of your being invited to a rally in Albania upon arrival there, and were recognized to say something on behalf of the United States. Do I remember this correctly?
Yeah, that's about right. I got to Albania. Our first ambassador there was an intrepid individual named Bill Ryerson, and but he was so he had been there TDY, but he had to go back to get ready for the Senate confirmation process, otherwise known as a gauntlet, and so I was kind of out there on my own, and I was asked to go down to this town for a pro-American rally. I didn't know what that was, but I said, okay, I'll do it. So this square, there were, you know, hundreds, thousands of people in this square of this little town on the coast of Albania, and so they asked me to come up and get up on a balcony, and I felt sort of like Mussolini, you know. I had this, you know, balcony there, and so, you know, I could see why people do become politicians. I mean, and so I'm looking out, and I had a really good interpreter there, and so I said, I can't remember even the name of the town right now. I could find it on a map if I looked at it, and I used, I said something like, greetings, I want to greet you from America. I want to greet you on behalf of every single American. You know, we love Albania, and I go on and on. You know, it's just shameless stuff. And I was just getting these fabulous roars from everybody. And so, you know, I said, we are here, our embassy is back, our flag is up. You know, I was on a roll. So after it was done, you know, this thunderous applause. And I, you know, to know the story is America left in 1946. We never got back until 91. So I finished, you know, and I'm surveying the scene. I said, how much fun is this? I mean, and then I feel this tug on my jacket. And this little guy says, don't you ever leave us again. So, I should have put that in the book. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
We have time for like 2 more questions.
Anybody who can quote Rocky and Bullwinkle is doing a great job for America.
Wayback Machine. That's
Absolutely.
Sherman, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mr. Peabody.
Yeah.
I get the sense that the leadership in North Korea was really unnerved by this UN report on their
Human
activity,
rights.
human rights, and that combined with movie, you know, Hollywood comedy, really kind of set them back. They don't know what the heck to do. Would you exploit that more at the UN? And
yeah, I wouldn't exploit it, but I would. You know, when I was dealing with their nuclear stuff, I was not going to be standing up and blasting them for their their human rights. But fine for other people to do that. But I had to kind of get through these nuclear talks. But I think it has been very important that Judge Michael Kirby, who's a Australian jurist, former Chief Justice there, really has painstakingly cataloged these grievous attacks on the dignity of human beings, and I think it's been a great service to do this in this kind of comprehensive way. I think the North Koreans are kind of freaked out by it because it's only been done anecdotally before. And I think it's very important. And also North Korea doesn't have too many allies out there. And I'm not sure, if this is finally sent to the International Criminal Court, which, by the way, the U.S. has never, signed up to. I think it could hold some people personally accountable. And I'm fine with it. But when I was trying to, get them to, saw off parts of their graphite moderated reactor, no, my job wasn't to get up and, hit them on human rights or to somehow make use of it. But I'm extremely pleased as a member of the human race that Judge Kirby did that.
Thank you, Ambassador. Getting from your really extensive experience in Western Europe and Eastern Europe.
I never really went to Western Europe.
Well, you dealt with Western Europe.
Is that the part with all the nice buildings and stuff?
It's all Europe, yes. Yeah. What do you think should be our policy towards Putin, situations in Ukraine, and the fact that Poland is very worried about Putin growing in power?
Yeah, I'm worried about it too, and I think NATO, NATO needs to be more than a political country club. It needs to be a military alliance. So I think we ought to be working to improve NATO capabilities. People have said that for years, but I think it's crucial now. Secondly, I think NATO needs to be a little more Eastern deployed. I'm not talking about putting battle formations on the eastern flank, but I think we ought to be doing more, frankly, of what the administration is doing in terms of more exercises in Poland and the Baltic states, etc. I just would never want a situation where so-called Article 5, that is, an attack on one is attack on all. I never want a situation where Article 5 is called into doubt. I think it is crucial that Putin in particular and Russia in general understands that if they want to mess with a NATO member, that means World War III. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, but I think we need to be really firm on these Article 5 guarantees. I think we need to continue to, have economic sanctions. I've never been a big fan of economic sanctions. They tend to empower and enrich a kind of kleptocracy and often fuse economic criminals with political criminals and make them a very powerful force together. I've never been a big fan of it, but I think if we pull back from economic sanctions, it would look very weak, and I don't think we can do that. I think it's extremely important that the U.S., in pursuing tougher economic measures of this kind, does so in a way that we don't open up divisions with the Europeans, because if the headline of all this is, Europe and U.S., in disarray, I mean, that's not going to help us at all. I think we ought to stop personalizing it a little on Putin. I mean, I don't like the guy any more than anyone else, but, to kind of call him out by name all the time, I think is not very effective tactic. I don't want to see I think we need to be careful that, we spent 25 years trying to keep Russia or bring Russia toward us, and I don't want to spend the next 25 years pushing them away, so we have to kind of manage these sanctions and manage this whole process carefully, but do so in a way that we don't kind of make Russia a kind of permanent pariah country, and I worry kind of where it's heading there. And finally, I think we have to find ways to work with the Russians on things like North Korea and other issues, and try to remind Russia that they have some responsibilities. I mean, what they did with Crimea is unacceptable. should never be accepted. That is, we should never invest one nickel there in Crimea. We should always, we should have, Crimea liberation ceremonies every year, just as we did with the Baltic states for years. In the end, whether Putin succeeds or doesn't succeed will be up to the Russian people. And I think we need to be respectful of that rather simple fact.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you.